Before this episode begins, we want to give you a trigger warning. We want you to know that the content of this episode speaks to pregnancy loss and miscarriages and/or a viable pregnancy. We understand this content may be triggering to some of you, and you may wish to save this episode for another day. Remember, your emotions are valid, and we encourage you to take care of yourself and reach out to reliable resources for support when you need them.
But my response to that is also, had I gotten married, what's to say that he would have been a good father, that we would have had a great relationship, and that everything would have been perfect, right? We don't know. And so all I know right now is she's surrounded by love. Everyone just feeds her with love.
I think you're right. Men are important, but love is more important at the end of the day. Whether you're a single mother by choice, or 2 moms, or two dads, or 3 months, 4 dads, it doesn't matter. What's important is the love that that child feels by their family. Hi, superhumans. I'm Dr. Mavis Garcia.
And I'm Dr. Wise.
We're two of the physician leaders at Markham Fertility Center, otherwise known as Our Baby, MFC.
As fertility specialists, we've witnessed firsthand the challenges, triumphs, and the myriad of emotions that come with trying to conceive. Whether you're just starting to think about having a baby, actively trying, or facing challenges along the way, My Fertility Podcast will be your go-to resource for honest conversations and a supportive community.
So grab a cup of coffee or tea and settle in, and let's demystify the world of fertility together. Today, we are honored to welcome Reema from Choice Mom Coach. Reema is an Indian-Canadian woman who has her own experience through unexplained infertility and conceiving her daughter as a single mother by choice. She harnesses her deep empathy and her familiarity with diverse cultural sensitivities when working with women on this journey. She founded Choice Mom Coach and has merged her established career as an executive coach with her life experience. You can connect with Reema on Instagram at Choice Mom Coach.
Reema, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you and to get into this topic, which I think is a really important one and a big one in the world of fertility and something that maybe isn't talked about nearly as often. Why don't you tell us about your fertility journey and how you got to be where you are today?
Thank you for having me. So I've always known I wanted to be a mom. I just never thought I'd end up doing it alone. And when I started on my path to trying to preserve my fertility, I thought I could buy myself more time. And so I went down the path of egg freezing. I tried twice and it just didn't work out. And I realized at that point, and I was 35 at the time, I have a decision to make. Either I can wait for a partner and potentially risk my chance of having a baby of my own, or I can go down this path of single motherhood and maybe find love later. And so I realized in that moment, for me, it was more important to be a mom than it was to have a partner. I made the call, and it's one thing to think about it, and it's a completely other thing to actually make the decision. After actually making that choice, I still went through a grieving process of feeling like this wasn't how I thought it would be. This isn't the way I wanted it for my child. But in the end, I knew I didn't want to settle just to be in a relationship with someone. My parents were arranged marriage, and that wasn't something I wanted for myself. I went down this path thinking that was the hardest part of my journey. And then you get to picking your sperm donor, and then that becomes the second biggest, hardest part of the journey of who's going to be the dad, right? And there's so much that comes with that. And then the next hurdle was finding out I had unexplained infertility. I went through 6 medicated IUIs and 2 rounds of IVF to have 1 transfer, and that stuck. And I now have a 17-month-old baby girl.
Wow. I'm curious, how long was the process of saying, I want to freeze my eggs to I'm going to be a single mother by choice?
It was actually quick. I've always had it in the back of my mind. I think when I turned 30, I was like, okay, it's getting, my biological clock. You feel it. And it was in the back of my mind that maybe I would end up doing this alone. And so it was not like this was the first time I actually thought that this would be the case, but it was the first time I was hit with the reality at 35. After the second round, the doctor said, we can try again. And I said, we've had 2 unsuccessful rounds. I think I have to make the call. And she's like, well, my job's to get you pregnant. I said, I think I need a couple months to kind of grieve and get ready, find the donor, I took about 6 months. And then in the new year, I said, in January, I'm going to start. I think I made the choice because of the information I had. And had I not had that information, I probably wouldn't have made the choice. 6 months later, going through the process of finding donor, grieving through all the emotions, processing what does it actually mean from a practicality standpoint, telling my family, I was ready in January to start then.
I don't want to make any assumptions, but you mentioned that your parents came from an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
So it's possible that you come from a bit of a traditional
Yes.
family. And
Yes.
again, I don't want to make assumptions, but what was it like telling your family a non traditional route to becoming a parent?
I made the mistake of telling my family maybe too early on in my journey, meaning before I even had gone through the fertility path of egg freezing. On a vacation, I decided to tell them, like, hey, maybe I'll have a baby on my own. And the reaction was not great. My mom was not supportive of having a baby with someone we didn't know, not knowing what the donor process or the sperm donor process is like, not knowing how much information we get. And neither did I really at that time, too. She was worried about the genetics we'd be passing down. And she said, wouldn't it be better to have a one night stand, which is crazy to hear from an Indian mother, but at least we'd know who the dad is. But when I look back at that comment, I realize it's fear coming through, right? Of just not knowing. And I wasn't equipped with the information to give them that reassurance that I would probably know more than most couples do in terms of the donor, in terms of that biological donor. And my brother, I still remember him saying how it's a selfish choice to bring a baby into the world and children need their fathers, which I absolutely agree with. I did grieve the fact that my child wasn't coming into the world with a dad, right? And I do believe that male role models are important. I didn't have all the answers to the questions at that time.
Mhm.
And I think what was different when I came back to it at the time after going through 2 failed egg freezing, them seeing me go through the emotions of that, the disappointment of that, they now saw how much I wanted it and they came around supporting it. And now that she's here, I mean, she is the love of their lives. She brings so much joy to the family and they are absolutely supportive of me and her.
And is your brother now a bit of a male role model for her?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes,
Good.
absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. You mentioned that you felt like you didn't necessarily do it the best way when you started out. That begs the question, what advice or what would you say to somebody maybe who's going along a similar path in terms of how to approach family, friends, whether they're more traditional or less traditional?
This actually comes up with my coaching clients a lot where they're scared to tell their family because of how they'll react. And my sort of number one advice is one, understand there's going to be a lot of questions and concerns, but it comes from love. Like they're
Mhm.
worried for you, right? And so, what you need to be aware of before going into that conversation is one, be as informed as you can. And two, understand that their fears are coming from a place of love. And so, not to be defensive, but to listen and to understand that they are also processing this information as well.
These are definitely really difficult subjects sometimes to broach with family and friends because I think everybody probably imagines their children having children in the most traditional sense, whether that's finding a partner and going the conventional road, if you will, via intercourse. I think there's a lot of similarities even in patients who are telling their families, we're doing IVF, we're doing fertility treatments, we need donor egg, we need donor sperm, I need to use a surrogate. It's always hard when you have to go back and sort of challenge that traditional notion or that idea that they have in their mind. And again, from love, because family, friends, they want the best for you. They want the easiest road, right? Then we don't necessarily always share the struggle, I think. It sounds like your family didn't necessarily know how much you wanted to have a child and how important that was to you, and that you were sort of starting to think about these things. And that's normal. I mean, we all start to think about things before we're ready for prime time, before
Yeah.
we're ready to present, right? And sometimes that gap is tough, I would imagine.
So there's a lot of worries for women as they go through their fertility journey. But I think if you're becoming a single mother by choice, there are worries that are specific to that. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are the thoughts going through your head as you're entering into that journey, other than the usual IVF and needles and costs and things like that?
Yeah, I think you go through a stream of questions in your head of, am I enough being a sole parent, right? Can I balance it all, be working mother, balancing work and life and child? There's the, what is the impact on my child for not having a partner or male role models or a dad? There is the financials, a single parent financials. Can I afford all of this? There is the practicalities of how do I go through day to days like today, where I had her in daycare and this recording. And do I have the support system that will be able to support me and go and grab her and be able to look after her while I can get some work done, right? It's not as straightforward. There's so much doubts and concerns and fears that come up, especially about yourself of, am I enough? Will she be okay? Will he be okay? Am I putting them at a disadvantage for bringing them into a single parent home?
And how do you go about addressing all of those concerns?
Yeah, so being a coach myself, or having been an executive coach, that really has helped me process a lot of it and even self coach myself through the process. I meditated on it, I journaled on it. It's just a lot of working through these fears. And one of the exercises I always have people do when they're starting out is just list out all these fears. And are they truly fact or is it an assumption? Meaning, are you worried about, are you truly going to be alone forever? That might be your concern if you choose this path. Or are you just making that assumption? Right. And going through one by one and really thinking about these fears and really seeing, are they real or are they in your head?
The Rima that is here talking to me today, who is mother to a beautiful 17-month-old daughter, what would that Rima say to the Rima of 2 to 3 years ago, having all of those questions? Am I enough? Is she going to be at a disadvantage? Am I going to be alone forever? Am I going to balance it all? What would you say to her?
Yeah, I would say you're stronger than you think, that you will find a way. You will find a way to push through when times are tough, when you're both sick, you will find a way to push through just like all moms do. It's not going to be easy, but there's so much joy on the other end too. Every day I'm still grateful that I made this choice and I only wish I made this choice sooner.
That's beautiful. A question that comes up a lot, or a challenging aspect that I hear a lot from my patients, is picking a sperm donor and making that decision. And obviously, it's a very individual process. But how did you go about thinking about
Yeah.
finding the donor, picking the donor?
That's a question I get a lot from my clients too, is, I'm struggling with picking a donor. There's so many options. What I tell them to do is usually start with the criteria. What do you need to have in terms of your donor? And the funny thing is, even during my process, I'd see someone with glasses and think, why would I get someone with glasses? Even though I've dated men who have glasses, why would I pick someone who has glasses and potentially give that to my child, right? There's some crazy things like that. Like, my donor has to be tall because if I have a boy, I want him to be tall. Like, all of these things kind of come to your mind, but then really it's just coming down to what's really important to you in terms of the criteria. There are some genetic things that you may want to be looking for, getting your genetic tested, seeing what the donor has. That's usually crucially important. Your CMV results, potentially considering that as well. But in the end, for me, it was about having a donor's essay really speak to me in the sense that when I read it, it either had the similar values that I had, that I could be like, this is why I picked your donor, because, we both sort of saw the world the same way, or he had the values that I wanted to instill in you as well. That one was really important to me. And then there was that question of open donor or closed donor. And there's a lot of fear in the beginning around having an open donor, thinking, well, if it's an open donor, they may want to contact them. What if they're disappointed? All of these things come up. And initially, I was all for closed donor, but then again, processed and realized that that was my own fear coming out, worried for what might be, and really taking a decision away from my child that if she wanted to or he wanted to meet them or connect with them, that they would be able to. So I ended up going with an open donor.
You're right. There's a lot that goes into picking a donor, and I'm glad that you ended up picking an open ID donor. I've never had to pick a donor for myself, but I do get a lot of requests from donor conceived children from many years ago, before I was even a fertility doctor, who are now really looking to contact their genetic parents. And they all kind of say the same thing, which is, I need to know where I'm coming from. So my eyes have been open and I'm beginning to realize that that is something that has nothing to do with how loved they are by their parents, whether they are genetic parents or intended parents, but it has to do with this desire to just close the loop in their story and understand where they came from. I think that's great that you've given your daughter a choice and that you recognize that it was coming from a place of fear and not from a place of putting her first. So that's very good.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you mentioned on the genetic testing being crucially important. I wanted to explain that for our listeners who might not be as familiar with the donor selection process. So there is something called carrier screening, which basically means that all of us, all humans on the planet, carry different mutations within them. And if the mutation is only in one of your chromosomes, then you might not express it. For example, somebody may be a carrier of cystic fibrosis, but not have any problems with cystic fibrosis because you need two genes to be affected. However, if you're picking a donor and that donor happens to have the same affected gene that you have, now you can have a child conceived with this particular genetic condition. Cystic fibrosis is just a common one. The purpose of doing genetic screening is not necessarily to see, I don't call it a match because that's not the term, but it's to make sure that the donor that you're picking isn't carrying the same genetic mutation that you carry to prevent the child from getting these conditions. And you're right, when you meet somebody and start dating them, you don't ask them, hey, let's do your career screening before this gets serious. But obviously, when you're picking a donor, that's one of the benefits. So you can do that up front. And you said something at the beginning that you know more sometimes about your donor that some people know about each other. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about recognizing these challenges and working through them and processing through them. I'm thinking about people who are listening to this podcast right now who are considering becoming a single mother by choice because they're feeling the clock creeping, maybe have tried egg freezing or they've been discouraged from egg freezing because of age or egg reserve or whatever. How do you even start that process of processing, right?
Yeah. I actually created a resource on my website, 5 steps to getting unstuck from making your decision, because it is so hard. You don't know where to start when you start this process. And the first part of that process is just understanding your why. Why do you want to be a mom? Why do you want to be a solo mom? Being able to have that understanding can sometimes help you through the tough times, right? And so just working through and journaling potentially through that. And then again, the fears, right? There's so many to just list out. My parents might not accept me. My friends might judge me at work, right? Like, how do I tell people at work? There's all of these things that you need to sort of work through. And part of just working through that is just saying it out loud or talking through it or writing it through a journal and just going one by one, knowing that there's all these things. Because keeping it all up in your head is not going to help. You'll have all these questions, but it's not really going anywhere. So actually writing it out and then writing, okay, what does this mean? Or is this really going to happen? Or what if it did happen? What would I do? Right. And so just working through each of those questions or fears can help to start breaking down and bringing more clarity. And then it's just information. Part of the reason making the choice happened for me so quickly was because I was left with this decision of I can't freeze my eggs. I don't have more time. So now do I want to wait and risk that chance or do I want to move ahead? And had I not gone through the process, I probably would have waited even longer thinking, oh, I still have time. I'm healthy. I don't drink, drugs, all of that stuff. I eat and exercise every day. I just didn't expect my egg count to be so low. And so I think we assume that we're healthier and that it won't impact our fertility journey, but that's not the case. We know that the number is 1 in 6 go through infertility. I think just knowing that information, seeing a fertility clinic, getting that information will really help, which is one of the steps of knowing where you're at in the journey, right? The other part is just understanding practicalities, from a work perspective. What would have to change? Do you travel a lot? Can you manage having a child and working? The practicalities of financials. Could I afford this? Do I need to change my lifestyle? Do I need to get a bigger home to accommodate my child? Working through and understanding practicalities can also help give you some clarity of like, yeah, I can do this, or no, this is something that would be a real struggle to do. And then there's the support that's crucial as well. You may not have your family on board, but maybe you have a good set of friends, neighbors, mom groups, right? Moms are always willing to help other moms too, is what I've come to learn in my short time. And so figuring out what does your support system look like and what could it be will also help ease through some of those fears and challenges.
I'm interested to know fertility specialists and fertility clinics. What can we do better to support people considering becoming single parents by choice?
I think from a fertility clinic perspective, we have the counselors in place to support, and that's helpful to an extent. And that's sort of why I started Choice Mom Coach is it's not the same as talking to someone who's gone through the experience. That's why I'm trying to connect with more and more fertility clinics to say, here's a patient handout or offer your patients a free 30-minute consult to talk to me. They might be at a point where they're trying to make the decision and here's a resource for your patients. So that just allows them to potentially have that conversation of around what they're worried about, all the questions they have. Because when I get these 30-minute consults, they just start peppering me with all these questions that they're worried about. And at least they feel like they're not alone going through this. From a doctor's perspective, or even the nursing team, I think it's just understanding there's a lot of doubt, fear, and loneliness that comes with a patient coming in on this journey, right? Like there's a lot of triggers that may happen. Sitting in a waiting room with couples can be triggering. Filling out a form that you're not filling out a partner section can be triggering. There's little things that can be tough for us as we're going through this process, feeling like we wanted it a certain way and maybe it's not. Or some have chosen this path actually and not wanting a partner. But just for us, I think what helps to alleviate some of those fears, concerns is just information and access to information. So having access to the nursing team, knowing we don't have that partner to talk us down and bounce things off of. So being able to access our nurses, being able to talk to the doctor to understand our options, our success rates, potential challenges. The more information we can have, the more confident and clear we can feel about our path forward.
I know you were not a patient of Mark and Fertility Center when you were going through your journey, and you certainly do not have to name your clinic. But what was your experience as a fertility patient?
I went through 2 clinics. I started with one for my egg freezing, the first round of egg freezing. And I'll be honest, it wasn't a great experience in the sense I just didn't feel like I had access to the nursing team and, being communicated through an app, it just felt a little cold. And the whole experience actually just felt a little cold to me. And so once we got to the point of 2 follicles that had grown for the retrieval, I had asked the nurse to speak to the doctor and she said, well, it's the weekend. I don't know if I can get you your doctor. And I said, any doctor is fine. I just need to see if we should still retrieve. And because I had that back and forth, I thought it should not be this hard to get to my doctor. And after that sort of interaction, I finally did speak to a doctor. We did end up canceling the cycle and not going through with retrieval. And at that point, I was like, I need to switch clinics. And when I did, it was a different experience. Like I did feel more at ease at this clinic. I felt greeted when I entered into the clinic by a receptionist rather than a tablet. And there was more interactions between me and the technicians or the blood nurse. And I just felt overall more at ease and felt like I was speaking to the same team each time for my questions and, able to get to the doctor. And that's why I do tell my clients is that it's okay to switch if that's what you need to do, but you want to make sure you feel at ease through this process because it makes a difference. Like there's a lot of stress already. It shouldn't be added by going to your clinic.
So, listeners who are considering being a single mother by choice, one thing that I hear a lot is they're concerned about even the social stigma of being a single mom when their child goes to school, etc. So, what's your experience been so far of being a single mom?
So far, I would say I don't necessarily always show it, right? It's not
Right.
something that always comes out and that I'm like, hey, I'm a single mom. Like, it's not the first thing I say
Oh, it's
to.
not. Yeah. Hi, I'm Reema. I'm a single mom.
Yeah, exactly. So, and even for work, I'll even say it's not something I shared right away because, one, people don't necessarily ask. And two, I didn't want people to change the way that they perceived me in the sense of, oh, let's give her more grace now that she's a single mom. Or I've had clients say, go ahead, you can leave. Don't worry, we can take care of this. Thinking that I need to be a single parent. But for those who do know, I mean, everyone's just supportive of me. The daycare that I take her to are super supportive. I asked them one time, what do we do on Father's Day? And they said, well, we can make a card for you if you want, or we can make a card for grandpa. It's still becoming more known every day, right? In terms of women choosing this path and men choosing this path to be a single parent. And I think it's just becoming more and more accepted as we go along. But so far, I haven't experienced any sort of negative reactions. I would say maybe on social media, we get the odd sort of comments of the men being important. And I don't disagree that their role is important. And I've now surrounded myself with men who can be a great role model to her. But my response to that is also, had I gotten married, what's to say that he would have been a good father, that we would have had a great relationship, and that everything would have been perfect, right? Like, we don't know. And so all I know right now is she's surrounded by love. Like, there's
Mhm.
no bickering around. Everyone just feeds her with love. She's just surrounded by love. And that's what's most important.
I think you're right. Men are important, but love is more important at the end of the day. Whether you're a single mother by choice, or 2 moms, or two dads, or 3 moms, 4 dads, it doesn't matter. What's important is the love that that child feels by their family, for sure. But you mentioned your clients in this conversation. So tell us about your coaching practice.
Yeah, so I started a year ago actually today, and it's been so far a journey of me sharing my journey, sharing the resources that I've come across through my journey. And I've been offering one on one coaching to clients who are in different phases of the journey. So they might be at the beginning where they're trying to make the decision and they want to feel confident about it or want to know if it's the right decision for them. So we'll go through some coaching sessions around that where we'd have our conversation and we would usually leave off where they would have some journal prompting where they could think through some of the questions that they need to work through in order for us to meet again. They might be in the preparing to conceive phase where they're picking a donor and need support through that, and just even an accountability partner to make sure that they're doing the steps they need to in order to be ready for their IVF cycle. There's the trying to conceive and pregnancy of mentally and emotionally having that guidance and support going through those two processes. And then more recently, I'm also starting to support women who are single mothers by choice to help them avoid burnout, because that's a very real result of being a single mother by choice, and just supporting them through doing it all and finding time for themselves.
That sounds incredible. A really great resource for patients who are in similar situations as you yourself were. And I think you hit on a really good point. Talking to someone who's done the same thing, who's gone through the same things is invaluable, right? You can't necessarily replace that in any other way. So, big question, of course, is how can our listeners connect with you?
They can connect with me through my website, and feel free to book a free consult through my website on choicemomcoach.com, or they can connect with me directly, message me on Instagram at choicemomcoach.
Thank you so much, Reema, for coming to my fertility podcast today. I know that you were talking about handling everything, right? You had an issue with the care and we had to pivot, but you still made it work. So, a very good example of everything that you've talked about today. I think this is going to be really useful for our listeners who are considering this option. I know this question comes up in my office all the time, and I'm very glad that I now have a resource that I can share with them to help them on their journey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks again. You're providing a really invaluable service. I'm also so excited to be able to share this with patients and with other people who are considering this. And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast, or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss. Music from Mix Kit Raising Me Higher by Ajay Stelino. My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice. nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.